everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley and today I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in the month of October. October is the month I really try to read a ton because I really like horror, thrillers, spooky stuff, and it's spooky season and it's the perfect time to just really indulge in all the reads. So I read a ton in October. I read at least like 14-ish things, including some DNFs, which is a lot more than usual for me. And I'm just getting overwhelmed looking at all these books that I have to tell you about. But luckily I vlogged about some of them, so I can direct you to the vlogs if you want to hear more in depth about any of the books. I'm going to try to go through most of them pretty quickly because it's already November 2nd, because I'm just behind because of Camp Weekend Ween. And so I have to get this video edited rather quickly, and so I'm going to have to be talking about the books rather quickly. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump on into it. So one of the first videos I did in October was a video reading horror books written by women. I was really excited to do this vlog because I read so much horror written by men and I really just wanted to flip the script and just focus on a couple books written by women. So in that video, I read The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher, the short story The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and a new horror book, The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. I talk about all of these in depth in that video, so I won't spend a ton of time on them. But I didn't really love any of these stories. The Hollow Places is a story that is like portal fantasy horror. It's about this woman who ends up moving in with her uncle, and he runs this museum of oddities, which I thought was really cool and a really strong way to open the story, and I was really enjoying the tone of this. And so I would definitely read from T. Kingfisher again because I really liked the writing style of it. But then the main character ends up finding a portal in the museum that sends her to this creepy world. She ends up going with this guy who's like working with her too, and then they spend a lot of time there, and it just kind of lost me because it really focused on a lot of the world building and not a lot of the character building, and I care about the character building more. So it was just a 3-star for me, but I will definitely read from this author more because I think it was just an interesting kind of writing style. The Last House on Needless Street I also ended up giving a 3-star rating. I thought it was written pretty well and it had an interesting, weird premise. I think it was just marketed to be this like revolutionary, crazy, weird, you will never see this coming type of story, but it wasn't anything that really blew me away. So it's difficult to talk about this book without giving away spoilers because the synopsis is intentionally vague. So I will just give you as much information as the synopsis gives you and tell you that this is about these 3 residents of a house on Needless Street, a older man who keeps blacking out memories and he drinks a lot, a teenage girl who's not allowed to leave the house, not after last time, and a cat who is obsessed with the Bible. And so you read from those 3 perspectives. Yes, you read from the perspective of a cat. It sounded like it was just going to be this really bizarre, cool, weird, potentially haunted house, potentially supernatural. I didn't know what I was getting into, but I thought it was going to be crazy, and it didn't really end up being that in the end. And so I was a little bit let down. I also didn't love the idea of the twist and where it goes, so it was just a 3-star. And then The Yellow Wallpaper, because this is like a 15-page short story, I didn't give this a rating, but I'm glad I read it. It is a classic for a reason, and reading it really made me think of how I've seen other works take inspiration from this story, and it made me appreciate those ties even more. This is a story about this woman whose husband ends up basically locking her in seclusion because he thinks that's what's gonna help her heal, but she's like, I think I should be socializing, and he's like, nah, stay in this room. And then she starts seeing things in the wallpaper and it gets pretty creepy. It was pretty good. Definitely would recommend reading it, especially because it's just a quick little short story. Another reading vlog I did this month was reading new horror books that you voted for me to read. So I put a poll on my community section of YouTube, which I do often, and had you guys vote for which new horror books you wanted me to read, and these were the winners. So I ended up reading Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw, My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones, and The Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig. And this reading vlog went much more successfully. I really enjoyed The Book of Accidents, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. This is a story that follows a supernatural town kind of story. And so the characters you're following is this man who grew up in this town. He had a very abusive father, so he's kind of separated himself from it, but he gets the opportunity to move into his father's house after his father passes away, and it's just like the right opportunity for his family. So he decides to do that. So he moves there with his wife and his teenage son. And then once they return, weird things start happening in the town again. There are sci-fi elements to this story. It gets pretty weird. It kind of has Stephen King vibes, but without a lot of the grossness and the things that I don't like about Stephen King stories. So I really did enjoy this one, and I do highly recommend it. Even though it's super long and I typically like shorter horror, I really did enjoy this story, and I thought it did a great job building the characters and building the atmosphere, and I would definitely read from this author again. My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. I ended up DNFing. I didn't like it, and I've seen it's been getting really bad reviews, and so I really wanted to like it because I wanted to be the one to say, no, I love Stephen Graham Jones and I can read his books. But it was just really hard to follow. His writing style just works better for me and his novellas. I've given the 2 novellas I've read from him both 5 stars, and then the novels I read, I couldn't even get through this one, so it's not looking good for the novel front. But this is supposed to be a story about this teenage girl in this town, and she's obsessed with horror movies, particularly slashers, and then her world around her begins to become a slasher. But it's written in such an obscure way, it goes off on such long tangents, it's so hard to follow, and the main character is pretty unlikable. I didn't like her from what I read. I ended up getting 80-ish pages into it, and I just could not force myself to go on any longer. I don't know, maybe one day I will pick this back up and try to finish it, but it won't be anytime soon. And then Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw. This is a novella that just came out recently, and I actually really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars, but now that I've seen more people read it, I've been seeing this get really bad reviews. A lot of people are saying they don't like the writing style of it, just like it's too flowery or poetic, or tries to be too flowery or poetic, or full of metaphors and just over the top. They don't like the characters. They don't understand what's going on in the story. I've just heard a lot of complaints. I don't think I've seen anyone else enjoy this, honestly, but I really did like it. I thought it was a good, fun little creepy novella. It read sort of like an episode of an anthology, just something quick. It follows these characters who are going to this haunted mansion in Japan, and they're going there because 2 of the characters are going to get married there. The one woman said she's always wanted to get married in a haunted house. It's been her dream since girlhood, and so that is why they are going there. And then they all have there's a lot of animosity and tension between some of them for different reasons, but they're trying to get past that to get through the wedding night. And then while they're there, they're drinking a lot, they're playing games, they're having fun, and then things start to get crazy and spooky. I think the reason that people don't like this as much is because this book is heavily influenced by Japanese folklore, and so there are quite a few things in here that are from folklore. There are terms in here, there are things that you may not recognize or know that may require you to do a little bit of research because the story doesn't lay it all out for you and give you the definitions of all these things. And so maybe that's why people aren't understanding this. But when I was reading this, I was looking those things up and kind of figuring that out as I went along, and it's really horrifying stuff. So I was enjoying it. Also, my partner was born in Japan. He's not Japanese. His family just lived in Japan for a long time, and so he ended up being born there. And so his family really appreciates Japanese culture, and he happens to know a lot about Japanese culture. And so as I was reading this, I was also just like, hey, do you know what a yokai is? Hey, do you know what this is? What is this? And he was just also able to tell me. And so it was just kind of cool because he already knew these things. And so I felt like I was learning more about something he cared about, which was also cool. But yeah, I don't know. I still really like this. I still recommend it. I think people should read it. The concept of why the mansion is haunted is absolutely horrifying. And that is also based on a piece of Japanese folklore of this woman who was going to get married there, but then her husband didn't show up, and she said, bury me in the foundation. And then now every year another girl gets buried in the foundation of this house. And so it's freaking spooky. It's scary. Look at this cover. It's a creepy novel. I would recommend it. And then the last vlog I did right at the end of October was for the Camp Weekend Ween readathon that is hosted by Gabby from Gabby Reads and Olivia from Olivia Reads a Latte. And so I read these 3 books, and I have a vlog dedicated to reading these as well. I read You Should Have Left by Daniel Kelman, Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Shauna McGuire, and The Fisherman by John Langan. And this was a little bit of a mixed bag of reads. So The Fisherman, I enjoyed most of the time. I ended up giving this a 4-star rating. This is a horror story that is about these 2 men who both lose their wife, so they're both widowers, and they really like to go fishing together. And they end up going to this one particular lake or creek called Dutchman's Creek or something. And while they are going out to this area, they end up stopping at a diner to eat before they go. They end up talking to some of the patrons, and this guy asks them where they're going. They tell them Dutchman's Creek, and he's like, oh my gosh, you should not go there. Let me tell you the history of this place. And then a lot of the book is that man telling the history of this creek and all of the creepy things that have happened there. But despite this, the two men decide to go anyway, and then you follow what happens then. So my complaint with this book was I thought the middle section was drawn out really long and the pacing was really strange, because in the very beginning you spend a lot of time getting to know the characters. There's a lot of character building. It's really excellent writing. I really loved the character building in this story, and I was really excited to see where it went. But then the middle portion, while the meat of the story is good, takes a very long time to get through before you return back to the men. And then I really liked the ending and where the story went as well. So it's a very good horror story, but I just wish the middle would have been condensed a bit, but I would still recommend it. I also listened to the audiobook of this, which is pretty long. It was 11.5 hours, but I listened to it sped up quite a bit. At the beginning, I didn't like the narrator's voice, but I ended up getting pulled into it pretty quickly, and I did like the audiobook experience too, so I would also recommend that if you want to pick this up. But I'd never heard of this author before. I'd never read from them, but it turns out they worked with Paul Tremblay a little bit. They've edited some works together or something. I really like Paul Tremblay, so I don't know. I'll check out to see if John Langan has any other works that I might be interested in. Down Among the Sticks and Bones, this is the second book in the Wayward Children series. This story follows some of the characters from that first one, but it doesn't contain any spoilers because it's actually a prequel that's following these two twin sisters named Jack and Jill, who end up going through this portal into this creepy land called the Moors, and there's a lot of Frankenstein and Dracula infusions in the story as well, and I loved it. I loved the first book in the series and gave it 5 stars. I loved this one in the series and I gave it 5 stars. I will definitely be continuing in the series, and I hope to keep giving them 5 stars because I just adore Shona Maguire's writing in this series. It has such a great fairy tale quality to it, and it's just so fun, and it's just such a relaxing read, just with the right amount of spookiness to it. So definitely really love this one. And then You Should Have Left, I Should Have Left on the Shelf because this was not good. I ended up giving this 2 stars. It could probably even be like a 1 star. It just wasn't great. The idea of this sounded super cool. It sounded like something that would be right up my alley. It follows a screenwriter who's working on the sequel to one of his successful movies. And so he goes with his family, his wife and his daughter, and they rent out an Airbnb in this isolated area so that he can focus and get work done. When they get there, people in the town are being kind of weird and saying, oh, you're at that house? Like, there's clearly bad history with this house. And then creepy things start happening to him in the house. This is written in the style of this being like his journal, and so there's also parts where you get to see some of the screenplay he's writing, and I didn't really understand why that was in the story or how that benefited the story in any way. And the writing style was just super disjointed and choppy and weird, and you didn't know what was happening, and it didn't make sense, and it just was not very good. So I would not really recommend this one. Somehow it is apparently a movie as well that came out in 2020. Am I gonna watch the movie? Yeah, probably, because Mark Wahlberg and Amanda Seyfried are in it, and so I'm curious. It's big actors, like maybe there's something there, maybe it's better in the movie. But yeah, this is not a novella that I would recommend. And then the last stack of books I have are just other random books that I sprinkled in through my October reading that did not make it in a vlog. The first one is The Ex Hex by Erin Sterling. This is the romance that everybody's talking about in October, and I didn't like it and I DNF'd it. I read about half of this book. I really gave it a good fair shot, and there was no chemistry between these characters whatsoever. I could not buy into this romance. It didn't make any sense to me. Let me tell you what the plot is real quick. So you're following this woman who lives in this spooky, like Gilmore Girls style small town, and she's a witch, and many years ago there was this other male witch who was there, and they had a little love affair for like 3 months, but then he ended up telling her that he was betrothed to someone else because that's how they do things, and she was like, what the heck, then why are you trying to be in a relationship with me? We're over. And then she ended up putting a hex on him, like just a little silly spell. She didn't think it'd be anything serious. Then they go their separate ways. They don't see each other for like 9 years. All of a sudden now he's got to come back to this town to do something for this festival. They run into each other, and then a romance ends up ensuing in a sort of enemies to lovers type style. Something that drove me crazy about this book was how much it said witchy. Like, this witch referred to everything she did as a witchy thing, the witchy shop, the witchy festival, my witchy things, taking a witchy bath, doing these witchy things. And it sounded so silly to me. Like, I don't know, I just wanted her to be a little bit more of a serious witch. Like, if you're gonna be a witch and you're gonna have magic, just say witch. Just say witch stuff. You know, witchy just sounded kitschy and I didn't like it. And then these characters had absolutely no chemistry together. Like, I don't care if you had a little fling and you got your little heart a little bit broken. It's been 9 years. So how are you still this hung up on this person? And also, that was like the only thing that the author was using to convince you that they would have feelings for each other, is because they had this connection all these years ago. You didn't really watch them forming actual connections to one another. They didn't have chemistry. There wasn't good banter. It just was not good. So I sat it down 50% of the way. I will not be finishing it. I will be removing this from my shelves. The only thing I liked about it was the cover. So it's a shame. Next up, I have Summer Suns by Lee Mandelo. And I think this was like one of the first books I read in October. And so it feels like that was forever ago. But this is a book that is queer, it is gothic, it is southern, it is academic, it is spooky. All the buzzwords you would think that I need to really enjoy a book. But I didn't really enjoy this book. I can't remember if I give it 3 stars or 2 stars, but I'd probably be cool calling it a 2-star at this point because it just didn't really leave a mark on me. I didn't really enjoy it. I thought it was very, very overwritten. Like, this was flowery, overdone prose to the point of why are we being so dramatic in the way that we are putting sentences together. I actually made notes of a couple things to point out. Also, the word erstwhile came up at least twice in this book. I have never heard that word before. What does that even mean? Okay, but like, here's an example. So you're reading this paragraph, Andrew's racking his brain for memories of this man, more people are filling into the room, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, conversations sprang up like small mushrooms after rain. That's all just to say that, like, people were talking in a room. Isn't that so dramatic? And it would have been okay if it was like a little bit to build the atmosphere of the story, but it just felt like it kept happening again and again, where sentences were just written in such a way that I'm like, why did you say it like that? Here's another very dramatic example. The trees out front of Vanderbilt's 3-story main hall cast inviting breeze-swayed shadows across the sidewalk and the stone staircases. The building carried a weight of age and respectability, something timeless that made him think of Eddie, bounded in his wildness, hunger that had never known privation. I couldn't deal with that writing style. What this story is about is this guy who is going to this college because his really good friend died recently, and everyone's saying it's suicide. He doesn't believe that his friend really would have killed himself, and so he's going to kind of retrace his footsteps and figure out what could have happened and what his friend got caught up in. Where the story ends up going, there's a lot of time with like car races on the road, which I didn't find enjoyable. There's this term I use sometimes for books that I say they feel gritty, and I don't know how to explain that, but that's the only way that I can think of it, and this book just felt gritty, and so I didn't love it. I also don't remember it being like exceptionally spooky. It has ghost stuff, but it's mostly just kind of sad throughout the book rather than spooky. So yeah, I don't know. Didn't really like this one. Wasn't really for me. Next up, another book that I didn't really like is Mirrorland by Carol Johnstone. This is a story about these twin sisters who, when they were younger, they had these wild imaginations and they just created this place called Mirrorland in their house. They had pirate adventures. There was like a tooth fairy. They just really had wild imaginations, and that's how they played together when they were young girls. And then as they grow up, they become estranged from each other for a reason unbeknownst to you. And then one of the sisters ends up going missing, and so that brings the other one back into her life to try to investigate, figure out what happened to her sister with her sister's husband. And everyone thinks that her sister is dead. They're ready to presume her dead, but she doesn't think her sister's dead because she thinks she would feel it and know, and also because she keeps finding clues that her sister left for her, and it seems like she's trying to just get her to remember something, and she is just going down that path of trying to follow the clues and figure out what happened to her sister. So there are a couple reasons that this story did not really work for me. For one, it was just incredibly slow paced. Like, when I tell you this is one of the slowest books with the least amount of things happening that I've read in a while, it is one of the slowest books that I've read in a while. And a lot of that is because the main character was just really passive, and you didn't get to watch her really build on this arc of coming out of her stubborn ways and really making active decisions to investigate things and try to remember things that she's forgotten along the way. She really just kind of kept doing her thing, kind of moved in this house with her sister's husband, and then clues would come and she would read them and then just be like, I don't know what that means, and then just be like, I don't know what that means, and then wait for the next clue to come. And that's kind of all the whole story is her just waiting, clues coming, and her being a pretty bad person. And so I didn't like that. And then what ends up happening in the story, the twist, just hit on some tropes that I really don't like in thrillers. I think they're just gross and not my favorite to read about. So all around, this ended up being a 2 stars for me because the writing was okay. Like, it was good writing. It just was not a great story, and it was paced too slow. Nothing happened, and the character didn't have a great arc, and then it was gross. So maybe it was a 1 star. I don't know. I just didn't really enjoy this one, which is upsetting because it was one of my most anticipated books of the year. I really thought I was going to love it, and Stephen King blurbs it and says it's dark and devious, beautifully written, and plotted with a watchmaker's precision. And so I thought it was going to be great, but now I really can't trust Stephen King because none of that was true. And then the last book that I finished in October was The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein by Kirsten White. I ended up reading this book for my in-person book club, and I was pleasantly surprised by this. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and I actually really enjoyed it. I think this is marketed as like a YA horror book, but I would actually call it more of an adult book, and it's definitely more of just like a fiction story with some darker themes, I guess is what I would say. This is basically Frankenstein from Elizabeth's perspective, so the wife of Frankenstein. And I actually haven't read Frankenstein, but we already had our book club discussion and we talked a lot about the original Frankenstein, and so I do know that this is not to a T following all the events. It kind of changes things and takes its own spin on the story, but I just thought it was really enjoyable. I really loved the writing style of this. I really loved the atmosphere and the tone. I think if you liked A Dowry of Blood, then I think you would really like this because they're very similar in having like a really somber, morose tone, following the woman's perspective of a woman in an abusive relationship with this monstrous man. It feels very historic because it's placed back in time. I just thought it was a really beautiful story. I really liked it. It really made me want to read Frankenstein, but then I ran out of time in October, so I haven't gotten to it yet, but it definitely is on my TBR. And then I guess I'll go ahead and update you quickly on that I did read a lot of Ghosts of Harvard in October, but I'm actually still trying to finish it up. It just took me a long time, and I had to put this on pause to do Camp Weekend Ween because I wanted to read a lot of books instead of just one book. And so I'm finishing up this one, but it's pretty good. I think it was the right choice for October because it has that spooky, dark academic vibes to it. Don't know my final thoughts yet. You're gonna have to stay tuned for November's wrap up to hear my full thoughts on this one. And then I've also been reading Monster She Wrote in October, but this is just a nonfiction collection of little anecdotes about famous women who pioneered the horror and speculative genres and history. And so I'm not like trying to fly through it. It gets kind of monotonous if you keep reading section after section, but I am still really enjoying this. I probably won't mention it again in another wrap up because I'll probably just continue to kind of flip through it like a coffee table book until I get to the end of it. But it is enjoyable, it's super cool, and it's a very beautiful edition that has really nice illustrations. So that is it for all the books I read in October. I said I wanted to make that quick, but I have a feeling that took forever because it feels like I've been talking for a long time. Usually I hold up all the books, but that would be a lot right now. I don't think I can do that, but I will tell you just a quick recap of my highlights of the month. Definitely Down Among the Sticks and Bones was a highlight. I'm excited to continue in that series. I would say Nothing But Blackened Teeth. Not my new favorite novella, but I did like it. I thought it was spooky and fun and a good October read. And then for books that really surprised me, I would say The Book of Accidents. I really enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I would, even though it's been so highly hyped because it's so long and because it has sci-fi elements. I was like, there's no way I'm gonna enjoy this. But I really loved it, and now I'm excited to read more from Chuck Wendig. And then The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein, just so beautiful, and honestly, the more I think about it, I think it's a 5-star read. Like, I really love this book. So that is it for me. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you think about them down in the comments below, and we can chat about that. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!